Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. You've likely heard the phrase, where there is no risk, there is no reward. Or perhaps that your biggest risk will be the one that you don't take. I think that this can be true, and what a wonderful phrase of motivation. It's possible that some of the risks we sometimes take result in something less rewarding, sure, but that doesn't stop us from trying, from moving forward, making mistakes, and getting stronger because of them. Then, there are those other times. The times that you don't even realize you're taking a risk, and that the kind of risk you're taking is the kind that means life or death. Sounds terrifying, and perfectly fitting for tonight's episode. So, let's get started, shall we? My story is a long one, and bear with me, it's a wild ride. I grew up in a house that was built in 1902. I was born in the late 80s, so the house had been remodeled a few times. It was a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom on the 2nd floor. The bathroom was at the top of the stairs, and my room was across the hall at kind of an angle. My sister and my parents had rooms further down a long, narrow hallway. For as long as I can remember, I saw a ghost. I called her Pam. My mom told me I began talking about Pam around the age of 5. And in her words, I never stopped. My mom never believed any of this and just brushed it off as my imagination. Pam was pink and transparent, a see-through, totally pink little girl. Maybe 8 or 9 years old. She walked around only the upstairs, and she never came down the steps. Honestly, I have no idea where the name Pam came from. Growing up, Pam would sit at the top of the stairs, waiting for me to run up to the bathroom after I got home from school. I would walk around her because she was always there, every day. If she wasn't sitting on the step, she would be just sitting on a bed or standing in the rooms or hallway. Harmless for the most part. However, if I ignored her, she would mess up my bedroom while I was gone, doing my paper route. And when I would get back home, my parents would be all sorts of angry over my messy room. But if I said a quick hi, she wouldn't mess with me. She never touched me, and I also never physically saw her move anything with my own eyes. But I would get really scared and nauseous every time she would destroy my room behind my back. So I learned very quickly to say hi to her every day. At the age of 15, my mom had put me into therapy because I was still bringing up Pam here and there. Pam was still always around. I was used to her, and she wasn't doing anything. So she didn't come up in conversation as often. Therapy helped, but not with Pam. When I was 17, my parents decided to put our house up for sale. And I don't know if it was all the people walking through or me packing my stuff, but something triggered Pam, and it got real crazy. About a month before our new house was built and ready to move in, I was asleep in my room. My bed was against the wall, and I could lie on my side and see right into the bathroom. While asleep, I had a dream of Pam, still transparent, standing in the doorway of the bathroom. She pointed up, and for the first time in my life, I heard Pam talk. She said, Look, that's my mom. I sat up in the bed, and from the light fixture, I saw a dark-haired woman, hanging, lifeless, by a rope. Her boot fell off of her foot, and it hit the floor, and I woke up. Holy shit. I couldn't say anything because my family never saw her. They didn't understand. Pam wasn't in their lives like she was in mine. I didn't really dwell too much on it. It was a dream. Pam was back to sitting on the steps the next day. Life as usual. But 2 weeks later, I had another dream. It started out exactly like the first one. The bathroom light was on, and I could kind of see in while lying on the bed. But this time, I heard weird grunting and splashing. I sat up and saw clear as day the woman that was hanging from the light fixture, only she was alive and holding Pam, no longer translucent, under the water in our bathtub. She was drowning Pam in our bathtub. I don't have any idea what made me wake up, but I couldn't contain my emotion. I ran down the hall and I jumped into my parents' bed, yes, at 17 years old. It was just my mom in there. I think my dad fell asleep on the couch or something, but I was hysterical. I told my mom everything through tears and gasps for air. My mom didn't know what to say. Then in the middle of my sadness, Pam walked into the doorframe of my parents' bedroom. She was transparent again. I quickly laid down really close to my mom. I pulled the covers over my head. I just remember saying, "Oh my God, Mom, she's in here." I held my breath, and seconds later I felt cold, small hands on my back, shoving me against my mom. I kept yelling, "Stop touching me!" My mom could only reply with, "I'm not touching you." This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a matter of seconds. When she stopped, she just stood there at the side of the bed, staring at me. She didn't move. I pulled the covers over my head again and ended up crying myself to sleep while my mom held me. We were both shaking horribly. I moved all my stuff out the next day, and I slept on the floor of our unfinished house the next few nights until my bedroom was done. I never went back. Shortly after my family moved out completely, before the next buyers moved in, the entire back of the house and the entire garage went up in fire. The official cause? Spontaneous combustion. The first people to buy and sell the house after us lasted 10 months there. They called my parents to tell them that they couldn't keep the window or the door shut in the room with the black carpeting. That was my room. I wanted black carpet when I was 15. I saw the house posted a couple of months ago on Zillow, and the only picture of my room shows the door open a crack. You can see a bit of the black carpet, but there's nothing in the room. The rest of the house is furnished. I've tried so hard to find any information about the girl that's in my old house, but there's almost no information at all. Just basic architecture and a lot of online documents. It's the craziest story, I know, but this was my childhood. Part of me feels sorry for Pam, but another part of me knows there's something strong and dark in that house. I know Pam loved me, but no way would I ever go back. Were my toes actually frozen? No, I could move them. For the most part, they were wiggling. numbish but moving. But I was freezing. And then there was my mental state. It seemed to be getting worse by the minute. Buried by snow and some of the darkest thoughts you could imagine. I was sure that I was going to die, which wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was knowing that I was going to die alone. I was in this exact situation because I'd decided to be here instead of being somewhere else. Intentionally avoiding human connection, but unintentionally winding up needing exactly that, human connection. My mind was racing, but it was also slowing down. Thoughts of death circled endlessly, but I was starting to feel hopeless. And with hopelessness came reflection. Earlier in the week, my parents had been guilting me to go to some party for some old person. And that was exactly what I said to them. Well, what I exactly said was more like, why the hell would I go to some party for some old person? Super rude, I know. In my defense, I was on winter break, and I only had a few days to do something other than school. College had been rough, and I didn't realize at the time that I was actually depressed. Either way, I argued with them until they eventually gave up and said that I wouldn't have to go. Instead of going to this event with my parents, I decided that I was going to go for a hike. I headed to the city of Fernie, which is in British Columbia, and I was going to visit the Flathead Valley trails. After spending months in a dorm room surrounded by people that I didn't care to be around, I was ready to be alone. So instead of inviting anyone or answering any of my friends' calls, I just decided that I was going to do this solo. I was prepared to be alone, and I'd even brought my satellite phone, since my dad wouldn't budge on that. The hike started out perfect. There were some people on the mountain, but several of them were snowmobiles, and they passed me along the way. I couldn't get enough of the sunny day reflecting off the snow-covered hills. After about an hour into my hike, I'd reached a part of the trail that I didn't think I was going to be able to cross safely. According to my map, there was a creek that ran through this area, and even though it wasn't very deep, I couldn't afford to get wet, knowing that I had at least an hour back to my car. So I made my way back down the trail to see if I could find another way up. As I did this, I felt a very eerie quiet, followed by a sound that I had never heard in my life. The closest comparison was that it sounded like a thunderstorm. I looked up at the sky, but it was still that clear blue, so what was that sound? Then the ground beneath me, the snow, it started to give way. I grabbed a branch that helped me gain my footing, but the sound, it was louder, it was closer, and then it was snowing. It looked like it was snowing, but just as I realized what I was actually looking at, I was hurled backwards by the sheer force of a ton of snow. It had been falling from heights above me, entirely covering the blue sky that had previously been in its place. And just like that, I was completely buried. For the first several moments, I struggled to even grasp what position my body was in. I could move my fingers, my toes, but I couldn't move my legs, and I could move only one of my arms, my left. I tried to use it to remove the snow that had packed around my body. Starting with my right arm, I was making progress followed by instant defeat as more snow just filled the space that I had cleared. Dark, cold, alone. I would surely die here, and I had only told my parents where I was. My parents who were busy at a party that I'd so rudely declined to attend. Even if they'd thought to worry, it would be hours. Did I have hours? I truly didn't know, but I was panicking, trying to move everything that I could, completely exhausting myself as I got no closer to light and no closer to knowing what I was doing. I started to actually feel the cold, and that worried me. I had several layers on, warm layers, but they were no match for being literally covered in snow. Now, my limbs were getting tight, especially my right hand, which was now starting to feel warm. I couldn't touch it with anything to confirm, however, I feared the worst, that maybe my glove had fallen off. My fingers were starting to get frostbite. At one point, I felt myself jolt awake. I wasn't even sure how I had passed out, but my immediate reaction was to start screaming for help. And that's what I did, the loudest and hardest that I could. I couldn't hear anything. Well, that's not true, actually. The sound that I could hear and had been hearing the whole time was like what you hear underwater, where everything is basically muted, but you can hear the waves. I guess that's the best way to describe it, although it wasn't calming like the ocean. It was terrifying, because I couldn't just reach the surface real quick. I had no concept of time. I only knew that it had been a long time, that I was weak, cold, and moving closer to thoughts of death. I felt such agony thinking about how my parents were going to feel, how unkind I was to them the last time I saw them. I thought about my friends. They'd been trying to reach me for days, and I thought about how I had ignored their calls. And then I thought about the fact that my parents probably wouldn't even get the chance to bury me. They would just go on through life wondering where I was, never having any sort of peace about anything. And then I thought about the kids that I'd seen on the trail. And then I was sick. I was making myself sick with these thoughts. I tried to shut them out, and I got some sort of energy again. So I started to wiggle my toes. Cold but not numb. I tried to move them more and more, until it felt like I was moving my foot. In what direction, I had no clue. I had the thought to spit. Hadn't I seen that somewhere? You spit to see which direction your saliva goes, and then you'll know if you're upside down. But I had no spit. My mouth was so dry. I was so thirsty. With my left hand, I took some snow, and I placed it in my mouth until it melted. And then I spit. It didn't seem to go in any direction. Then, I slowly felt it run down my upper lip. It clicked with me that I was on my back, that my feet were facing more upwards. I was too tired to really do anything about it, but I decided I might as well use all of my energy to kick my feet. I thought, they are closer to the surface. Maybe I can make some way somehow. I again found myself abruptly waking up, having no idea I'd fallen asleep again. But this time, I could hear something. I almost forgot that I couldn't move when I realized that the sound was voices. Still stuck, I used my voice again, using whatever was left to literally scream my lungs out. Within moments, the voices were louder. I could hear several people shouting something, over here, over here. Oh my God, they found me. So I kept screaming, until finally I could hear that the voices responding to my screams were telling me to hang on, and that they were going to get me out. Still, I was in a panic state, and I couldn't stop myself from screaming, so I just kept yelling, until finally I felt something physically move my leg, and then the rest of my lower body. Nothing compares to the feeling of the sun on my face in that moment. My eyes had been closed, but I felt the warmth. I felt the warmth of people and the sun, and I was never more grateful for other humans. My life had literally been saved. I had frostbite on 2 of my fingers on my right hand, and some of the skin on my face was damaged by the cold. These were nothing. temporary and minor inconveniences at the most. I was one of the lucky ones. Flathead Valley had experienced a serious avalanche, an avalanche that left several snowmobilers dead and several others needing emergency rescue. There were 3 or 4 others like me, individuals that had been at the trail end of the avalanche. Rescue crews were able to identify me because of my glove. They had seen it while combing the trail for people that were caught. I was grateful. I couldn't believe that my glove had actually helped in this situation. I'd been buried for a little over an hour, but it could have been much worse. Naturally, I hugged my parents like I've never hugged them before. I called my friends. I did it all. I also went to the doctor to address my depression, but ironically, I didn't feel nearly as depressed after the event as I had before. Something about almost dying, I guess in my case it was what I needed in my life. A hard lesson, but a lesson that I needed nonetheless. Throughout college, I shadowed and interned with several individuals of the Mountain Rescue Association. These are people that are highly trained in rescue specific to the conditions of the mountains, but they also have normal day-to-day jobs, since the MRA is mainly a volunteer group. I have so much respect for these people, it's not even funny. These people put their lives on the line to make sure people like me get to go home to their families. But they're also the same group that has to tell families that their loved ones won't be coming home. So, if you're a fan of the mountains, and maybe a fan of being alone, I urge you to consider the risks you take, because one of those trips could be your last. When I turned 21, I purchased my first home. The house was an old, small, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, foreclosure home. I'd gotten a remarkable deal on the place. It had some cosmetic issues, and it needed a new toilet, but it was perfect for me. Since my boyfriend at the time was pretty handy, he and my dad were able to make most of the updates before I officially moved in. During that week of renovations, I was going back and forth between the old place and my new place and my work. I remember the first odd reporting, which wasn't as odd at the time, but over time, collectively, it adds to the overall creepiness of this home. I had just arrived at my house, and my dad was working on the bathroom. When he sees me walk in, he pops out to ask, "Was that me talking just a moment ago?" Since I'd been alone and I hadn't said a word since I got out of my car, I gave him a confident, "Nope, haven't said a word. I just got here." He didn't press further, and I didn't ask him anything about it. We moved on. The next time was my boyfriend. He was in the basement organizing my new tools, and he kept hearing footsteps. He said the footsteps sounded like someone walking back and forth just above him, so the kitchen. He was convinced that it was either me or my dad, so he called out a few times, even moving closer to the stairs to call out again, thinking we couldn't hear him. When he finished up with the tools, he went upstairs, expecting to see one of us, but he saw no one. He said that's when he called me. My dad and I had picked up dinner, and we were bringing it to the house. But we hadn't been there all day. Similarly to my dad, my boyfriend didn't really expand on his experience. Not at first, just saying that he thought he heard us upstairs, but it was probably just the house itself. Mind you, up to this point, I had never had a paranormal experience. I wouldn't have even considered it, honestly. But then, I actually moved into this house, and slowly, the little things, really started to pile up. There was a door in the kitchen to a small but deep pantry. The door was one of those slide from side to side to open. At first, I would hear that noise. I wasn't sure that's what I was hearing, but I'd hear that noise and I wouldn't be in the kitchen. So I'd walk around the house and just sort of wait to hear it again. After living there a while, it started to click. I was hanging stuff up in the hallway, just behind the kitchen wall, and I heard the noise. My boyfriend was in the house with me, so I yelled out, "Babe, did you hear that?" And he rounds the corner, scaring the shit out of me. I'd thought that he was further away, and he says, "What noise?" After settling down, happy that it was just him that startled me, I told him that the noise that had just happened sounded like something brushing against wood. He laughed, and then he went to the pantry, opening and closing it. "This noise? It's your pantry, you goof. I'm stocking it up." He said this, opening and closing the door. I shook my head and said, "Yeah, that's the noise." Now, even though we'd essentially figured out where the noise was coming from, I'd still heard it when nobody was there. And though I also wasn't convinced that something spooky was happening for sure, I'd made my boyfriend stay at my house for a couple of days on end. I wanted him to experience what I was experiencing so that I didn't feel crazy. And moreover, so that he could fix the problem, if it was something with the house. One night, we were both in the living room, watching a movie, when we heard the noise. We darted up, almost excitedly, and scurried into the kitchen, where we saw the pantry door was open. Weird. That's what he said at first. And then he said that we just needed to get a new door. He thought that this one might be too light. I wasn't sure that I agreed or even what he meant. But then I thought about it and decided, yeah, it would be nice to not have to worry about this anymore. The next day, we picked up a door from the hardware store, one with hinges and a latch. And just like that, it was installed. The old door was put into the basement storage space because it was still a decent piece of wood, as my boyfriend had said. No more strange noises, at least for a while. I had been in the basement with my dad. It was my birthday, and we were discussing plans for a small wine cellar. There was a space in the basement that had already had shelving, so my dad was measuring it so we could add them along the wall. We were talking, and we were interrupted when we both heard the sound of footsteps above us. Is Mom coming over or something? I had asked this because I knew my boyfriend was at work, and he would be for another 3 hours. The plan was supposed to be dinner at my parents', so I wasn't sure why my mom was here. No, not your mother. At least I don't think so. Honey? My dad called out to my mom, but we didn't hear anything. He said he was just going to go check it out, and so I stayed downstairs. A couple moments later, he came back down saying that was so strange, saying there wasn't anyone up there, but my pantry and kitchen cupboards were open. We had both been upstairs before the basement, and we knew that those things weren't open, and we knew that we had heard footsteps. I think we need to get you some sort of alarm system, just in case. Anyone living alone should have something like that. My dad then joked that he would get me that instead of the wine cellar. Ha ha. Well, the next morning, my boyfriend and I were sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee and eating cereal. We start to talk about what me and my dad experienced the night before, and he reminds me of the first time that he was here alone, how he had heard footsteps too. Then we're talking about my dad's experience, the pantry, etc., all of these combined. Half serious, I state the possibility that it's a ghost or something. And almost immediately after, and in a joking fashion, my boyfriend stands up and says, "Show yourself, demon." As soon as he finishes his sentence, I expected the worst. When nothing happened, I was able to crack a smile. He laughs, sits down, and says for good measure, "If you're not a demon and you're just a rat or something, show yourself." Kid you not, we heard a loud crash come from the basement. We both look at each other, wide-eyed. "You have to go check," I whispered to my boyfriend. I could tell that he was not excited about his new mission, but he headed to the basement. I asked him from upstairs what fell, and he didn't answer. I told him, "Don't try to scare me or something," and he said, "No, I'm not." He just sort of stopped talking. And sort of fast, he hopped up the stairs. "It's that door. The old pantry door. It fell or something." He didn't sound too confident. I told him that we really needed to get rid of that door. But as spooky as all of this was, we found ourselves sleeping fine that night, and we didn't experience anything strange for several weeks. By the time summer arrived, I hadn't gotten my AC installed, so it was making for some very hot nights in my bedroom. Because of this, I started making us sleep in the living room where it was cooler. I had an alarm system installed. Granted, this was late 90s, so nothing fancy. And my boyfriend was there. I felt safe, to say the least. We woke up, abruptly, to the horrible sound of talk radio blaring from somewhere in the house. I felt completely disoriented as I tried to locate the source of all this noise. I looked over and my boyfriend was doing the same thing. I looked at the kitchen clock. It was almost 4 a.m. The sound was coming from an old stereo in the guest bedroom that I'd set up. My boyfriend hollers that he found it, so I head back there. But as I'm walking back there, I'm starting to feel nervous. I knew for a fact that I hadn't plugged that thing in. I have a thing about appliances being plugged in when they're not being used, and this stereo was no exception. Nothing, except for the bedroom light itself, was plugged in. When I got to the back room, it was still playing loud, and my boyfriend, confused, looking at me. "It's not even plugged in. What the f***?" He backs away from the thing, and it stops playing. For a long while after this, we both tried to get it to do that thing again. We would mess with it, plugged in, not plugged in, but we couldn't explain it. The stereo had no battery. It just shouldn't have worked. My boyfriend somehow was able to convince himself that there was a battery in the thing, somehow, some way. But I couldn't go with that explanation. There just wasn't space for batteries. None of it made sense, but it happened. That much I was sure about. There wasn't a lot of activity after that. I decided that was because I'd gotten rid of the stereo and the door. I'd lived there for 2 years before eventually selling the place. The reason I sold the house was my last experience and excellent timing. By this time, my boyfriend and I were no longer together, so I was living alone. Not entirely alone, as I had just adopted Monster from the dog rescue near my house. So, we're in the living room. I'm watching TV while Monster slept half on me and half on the couch. Out of his slumber, Monster perks up, and as he does, out of the corner of my eye, I see a shadow move just out of sight. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up, and Monster jumped off of my lap. He was running towards the kitchen, growling, barking. I followed him, and when I enter the kitchen, I see a full-on shadow figure bolt into the pantry. It wasn't a person. it couldn't have been, because the shadow, it didn't touch the ground. Then, the door, which had been opened, closed. It didn't slam. It just did the same thing it usually did. Closed slowly, and then click, the sound of the latch. I just stared at the door. My dog growled, and he wouldn't leave that area. There was something different that night. I couldn't bring myself to stay there. I legit ended up renting a hotel. It was way too late to bug my parents. But the next morning, I went to my parents' house, telling them I had to sell the place. It turned out there was a big developer in town that wanted to buy 3 of the houses on our street. Plans to make one large multifamily unit or something. So like I said, it was good timing. Interesting thing, that multifamily unit never did finish being developed. It sat vacant and half-built for a long time, until it was eventually demolished years later. Now, it's a Costco. I don't live anywhere near the area, and I don't have a Costco membership. But I've always been curious if anyone who works there or shops there has experienced anything unusual, or more frank, if they've seen a shadow person. Because it's either that or someone was straight up living in my house without my knowledge. I was recently discussing ghosts and sharing ghost stories with my best friend, and remembered this strange experience I'd had during outdoor education camp in 6th grade. I realized I hadn't thought about it for many years and decided to write about it here, because to this day, I have no idea what I actually saw, and it still gives me the creeps. My best friend had also been there at the time, but I'd been too afraid to tell her about what I'd seen, in case I was just crazy. We're now both in our early 30s. It was 2001, and the whole 6th grade class, so about 60 kids, had a week-long camping field trip in some redwoods, a couple of hours from our school. It was supposed to be a celebration for finishing elementary school, basically a week of swimming, hiking, crafts, and adventure. It was great fun. On one of the last nights, the camp aides took us on a night hike into the forest. There were about 5 to 10 camp counselors and teachers with flashlights, and the students got little glow sticks to hold. We first gathered in a large soccer field to get directions and organize our group. It was very dark, and we could see all of the stars in the sky. We were surrounded by thick, dark forest. As I marveled at the nature around me, I saw something white flittering about in my peripheral vision. I turned to see a strange, rapidly shifting, white entity. It seemed like it was glitching, the way that it was sort of blinking in and out of existence. It was almost pitch black outside, yet the figure seemed to be internally lit, with sparks of energy. Thinking it was my eyes adjusting to the dark, seeing floaters or ocular debris, I rubbed my eyes and blinked. I looked straight at it, expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. It actually seemed to become aware of me looking at it, as it moved back into the trees a little further, as I continued to watch it move about. When I looked away, I could still see it in the corner of my eye, starting to come closer. It emerged from the perimeter of the forest. At first, it looked like a humanoid, diaphanous figure. Then, It morphed into a wolf-like figure, running on all fours quickly. There was a good distance between me and this spirit, but I was still scared, and I felt sick to my stomach. I thought I was going crazy or something was wrong with my eyes. I didn't believe in ghosts, and I'd only had a couple of spooky encounters like cabinet slamming. Up until this moment, I'd always felt there was a logical explanation to everything. Anyways, we finally began our hike. My best friend was right next to me, but I told her nothing of this creepy-ass, shifting, transparent creature thing in the forest. The thought of her not being able to see it, or thinking that I was crazy, that was too much of a risk. To my relief, we turned away from the side of the forest where the thing was, and we start to enter the forest on the opposite side. The trail was very steep. We hiked in a long line, with the camp aides at the front, middle, and end of the group. I was somewhere in the middle. After 15 minutes or so of hiking, I remember feeling a prickly sensation down my spine, and my stomach churned. I glanced behind me, and that's when I see the forest thing at the very back of the line, following us, or me. Although there were still a lot of kids in the line separating me and the thing, it was much closer than before when it was in the woods by the field. It now had a distinctly humanoid form, although its edges seemed blurry and in still constant flux. It had no face, and if I stared at it directly, it would fade somewhat, but not disappear. And like before, when looking at it peripherally, it became much more solid in form. I was scared shitless, but still said nothing to anyone. I decided my eyes were still tricking me. Once we got to the top of our destination, it was time to turn around. I saw the figure still hanging at the end of the line. Then, the front of the line doubled back, and to my horror, I realized I would be forced to pass the white figure. As soon as I got within 15 or 20 feet of the figure, it dissipated, like steam or smoke, right in front of me. I never saw it again. I didn't sleep that night in the open-air cabins, and I was very relieved that we were going home the next day. This happened in 2015, just after I'd gotten my real estate license. It was a great year for selling houses. They were being sold like hotcakes, and the buyer's market was fresh with a ton of people looking to buy a new home. I was having a great year, and it had started to calm down a bit as we were hitting the rainy season. There was one house that I kept seeing listed and then taken off the market, only to be listed again. Each time, the price dropped. So it started to seem like something was wrong with the place. After about 3 months of watching the house, I decided to approach the sellers. I wanted to challenge myself to sell this home without them having to lower the price. The homeowners agreed. They were shocked almost that I wanted the opportunity, but I was confident. I had spent some time investigating the place, and by that I mean going over paperwork as well as the inspection reports. The house was in great condition. There was truly nothing wrong with this place. Easy sell, I told myself. Within the first week, I already had quite a few people who wanted to see the place, so I decided that I would host an open house. I brought in some decorators to stage the place. This is pretty common, and our office actually had our own staff to do this. We also had furniture and a storage unit. When I showed up to the house, I was kind of pissed off. The place was totally locked, which was great, but one of the large vases in the entryway had been broken, and a bunch of magazines from the holder were spread all over the living room floor. I quickly cleaned this up and started to set up the hors d'oeuvres. I'd deal with the decorators later, because otherwise they'd done a pretty great job. 15 minutes before opening, I decided to start a fire in the living room fireplace. Genius, I thought. It was rainy outside and a bit cold, and so I thought this would be the perfect finishing touch. As I finished lighting the fire, I heard the sound of a door close, and then a bit closer to me, the sound of another door closing. I checked my watch and then I looked out to the driveway. No cars except for my own. I walked back and found the door that had closed. It was the smallest of the 2 bedrooms. Apparently the first door closing was the closet within the bedroom, which was also now closed. I went inside the room to open the closet, and just as I did, the bedroom door slammed shut. It scared me, but like a jump scare. I cursed out loud, and then I walked out of the room, making sure that both of the doors were open first. Afraid this might happen while guests were there, I decided to find something to put in front of the doors to prop them open. I'd settled on some books that I'd found on the bookshelf, which I used to keep all the doors open. 5 minutes until guests would arrive. I sat in the kitchen area to keep an eye on the entrance. My back was facing the kitchen when I started to feel uneasy, like someone was watching me or was very close to me. I turned around, and then I jumped out of the bar stool so quickly that it actually fell over. Every single cabinet in the kitchen was wide open, and I found myself saying out loud, "What the actual f***?" as I was grabbing for my phone. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my phone, but having it gave me security. I got the nerve to just walk into the kitchen and quickly shut everything. When I did this, I was again distracted by another noise. I couldn't even describe it other than a loud flutter. I was literally watching magazines be thrown across the living room and towards me. My heart started pounding as I ducked out of the way, and just when I thought that I would grab my phone to document what was happening, I watched as a strong gust of something threw large embers and a piece of wood from the fire and onto the rug just in front of the fireplace. Now, I was in disaster mode, rushing to the kitchen sink, where underneath we'd put a fire extinguisher. Running to the living room as fast as I could, I started to put the fire out. Once the log was extinguished, I just sprayed toward the fireplace itself, putting everything out before more fires could start themselves. Breathing in fumes and standing there, I heard another sound. The sound of someone pulling into the driveway. Showtime. People were literally starting to show up, and I had no idea what to do. I could not show this house, not in this condition, not ever. Just before walking outside, I glanced towards the bedrooms, and all of the doors are closed, and all of the books are stacked neatly in one pile. Hell no. I doubled back, grabbed my phone, my purse, my keys, and I ran outside. I had no reservations after what I'd just seen. I told the couple in the driveway that due to unforeseen circumstances, I had to call off the open house immediately, finishing with the suggestion that they don't look at this house at all. They looked a little confused, but they didn't question it. Taking my card, they got back into their car. I didn't leave the house immediately because I was afraid that I hadn't put all the fires out, and I really didn't want to burn these people's house down. It was bad enough that I was never going to be able to sell this place. I didn't need to destroy it too. While sitting outside, I called my dad, asking if he wouldn't mind coming by after he was done showing a property of his own. He agreed, and so I waited. Sitting in the car, I stared at that house, feeling off. What had just happened? I had no idea. But looking at the house, I could have sworn I saw something pass by the front bedroom window, the smaller of the two, the one that had initially closed its doors. I started my car and I drove down the block, deciding to wait for my dad there. Lucky for me, the only things that were ruined in all of this were the things that our office owned. The house itself was safe from damage, but I don't know about safe in general. I mean, at one point, there were magazines and fire flying around on their own accord. That's basically the poster child of not safe. Anyways, I never did end up selling that house, though the couple was able to sell it eventually. It was on the market for over a year, which was unheard of at the time. But after what I experienced, I completely understood. Not everyone wants to actually live in a haunted house. I currently live in the house that I grew up in. It's over 30 years old, and while living here, many unexplained things have happened. Nowadays, I'm incredibly attached to the home, and I could never imagine selling it. Since it's been literally 20 years of on-again, off-again experiences, I'm not really creeped out by them anymore. However, that wasn't always the case. Take the time that I was just 8 years old, my first experience. We'd just moved into the house, and it was one of our first nights actually staying the night with all of our furniture. I remember that it wasn't that late because we'd just finished eating dinner, and the news was on, but it was dark outside. I was sitting in my dad's recliner, listening to him and my mom laugh in the kitchen as they washed the dishes. And I was watching the news. Realizing that I didn't want to watch the news, I started to feel around for the remote. Then I noticed it was still next to the TV. Feeling lazy, I called out to my mom and dad to see if they would come and hand it to me. They didn't answer, so I assumed they couldn't hear me. Instead of screaming, I decided to get up. But right when I stood up, something pulled me back into the recliner. I looked up, and all I saw was black. It was a deep, black, shadow-type figure. No features, just the outline of shoulders and the shape of a head, large and round. Within moments, I felt my eyes become so heavy that I struggled to keep them open. And before I knew it, everything was black. The next time I opened my eyes, I saw my parents sitting on the couch next to the recliner. They were just watching TV. I felt incredibly groggy, asking my parents what happened. They just sort of looked at me, at each other, smiled, and my mom said, "What do you mean? You fell asleep, sweetheart." But I hadn't fallen asleep. Had I? I mean, I was completely awake, and then that thing. Being a kid, when I told my parents what happened, it was explained to me that I had a dream. Except, I'd had dreams before. This was not that. Then there was the bathroom downstairs, or the downstairs basement in general. At first, it was just a toilet and a sink. Sort of dark and not inviting. There were some things that were left in the basement. Among them, a mirror, various large picture frames, curtains, random things. My mom put up the mirror, and she put a houseplant in the bathroom. This made it all a little less creepy. I remember being downstairs working on a project for science class when I had to pee. I darted into the bathroom, handled business, and as I was washing my hands, I glanced in the mirror and saw in the reflection someone standing outside the bathroom door, hovering over my project. I assumed my mom, but then I got that same feeling. Heavy eyes, so heavy I couldn't keep them open. I turned around and could see that the figure was just standing there. I tried to walk out of the bathroom, but towards the basement staircase. But before I could even fully exit the room, everything was dark. I woke up to my mother now standing over me, relieved that I had opened my eyes. My mom scheduled an appointment with the doctors after I had told her what had happened. When I compared it to the time that I was in the chair, I guess that's what worried her, that something was going on neurologically. But that doctor visit turned into another doctor visit, only to be told that I was fine. Nothing to indicate anything was wrong with my brain on any of the various scans that they had done. I do recall trying to explain the situation to the doctors, but it didn't seem to click with any adults that I talked to. They all seemed to assume this was a nightmare of some kind, but this was happening at hours that I would normally be wide awake. But almost every time that I would be in the basement alone, something strange would take place. I would always feel like something was there. Or like the time I was walking up the stairs, and I saw a full-on hand reach out through the stairs, attempting to grab my leg. I shrieked, and I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't tell my parents about this one, but I wouldn't have to. When I was in the 8th grade, I remember hearing my mother scream from downstairs. I was in my room, and as I ran out, I met my dad in the hallway, who looked at me, concerned. When we got to the area of the house where the basement door was, my mom was standing there, with her back against the door, breathing heavily. She's shooting my dad the craziest look, like she's mad but she's terrified. My dad is now walking up to her and asking if she's all right. She breaks eye contact with him to look at me for just 1 second. Then back to my dad, telling him that she needs to speak with him in the other room. Of course, I eavesdropped on the entire conversation, where I heard my mom tell my dad that there was someone under the stairs, that she saw a hand reach out as she was walking up. She tells him that she dropped all of the laundry and she locked the door. My dad demands to call the police, and she tells him no, it was a child. They're both quiet for a minute. When I hear them start to walk back, I scoot as far away as I can, but I'm still in view of the door. When they make their way into view, I walk over, but my mom tells me to stop. She tells me to go watch TV. I don't. Instead, I watch them go downstairs, while my dad calls out and my mom closes the door. Eventually, they come back up the stairs and are talking about how they just don't know, and that was the strangest thing. And then they shush themselves as they see me. They didn't talk to me about it then, but years later, I confirmed with my mom that she had seen what I had seen, and she confirmed it wasn't the only time that she had seen that child. Yes, child. I knew the hand looked small, but I never saw a full-on being, but she had. I focused on these two experiences, the shadow entity and the hand, because they were the things that really freaked me out. Throughout living here, though, it's far more than just those. It's been the sound of running up and down the stairs when no one is running. Like most occurrences, I was the first to notice, but also, like most occurrences, my parents caught on too. The shadows that you would always see just out of the corner of your eye, Each time I did, I would feel uneasy just for a second, wondering if I was going to pass out. But these glimpses felt different, not as dark, literally in color, but also in the lack of feeling that came over me. Over time, the activity really dulled down. I do remember throughout my teen years having trouble with sleep, paralysis, insomnia, sleepwalking, but I seemed to grow out of that too. It wasn't until sometime last year, 2019, while talking with my mom, that we had the first occurrence we'd had in a while. We were together in the kitchen, and my mom brought up all the weirdness that used to happen in the house, talking about how strange it was that a lot of it had stopped when my dad passed away. He died of a heart attack back in 2014, and she had a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that, but it had been years. We started to reminisce about a lot of things, like how, when my dad first passed, we'd seen dimes placed in random places. Places like my vanity, right in the middle, or on my dad's side of the bed. We'd like to believe that my dad had left them there. Well, on this night, after cleaning the kitchen, we were both shocked and definitely emotional when we saw a dime sitting on the edge of the kitchen counter. Thank you so much to everyone who shared, and of course, to all of you for listening. And don't forget to join me every Friday night at 11 p.m. right here on neoretrofm.com. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Darkest Hour YouTube page. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, and check out our subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.